All right, so let me put this away. So you don't really need this. So if you open up your Eclipse with the event practice1.java, it should be something look like you're on the screen here, look like this. So last week, what we talked about is implementing. I give you a tutorial that's in week 4. There's a GUI practice. And the goal for this GUI practice, we implement a GUI interface from you need to create a stage, create a scene, and once you have the scene, then you have to bind all those elements together. Now, this is just the GUI outlook. But when you click on the submit button, what's going to happen? In our the first tutorial, I also give you the code. Simply, we create, button click, set on actions. We have an inner class called button handler. And once you do this handler, we will print out what's in your console or what's in the text field. So today, what we are going to do, I give you this event practice 1, is I pretty much implement everything to you. But I'm going to walk you through the code quickly. Well, maybe not quickly. So I didn't write any of the annotations, the comments, documentations for the code. So I want you to be able to explain the code by even reading it. And there are just a few implementation needed you to complete, okay? So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself to ask. So first off, when we read this class, that public class event practice 1 extends application. So we know this is a extending, which is inheriting from application JavaFX application library, that class. So we inherit from here a couple things that we need to implement. First off is within the driver class. This is your driver FX JavaFX application. The main method you need to implement this static method launch with an argument. Okay, so and the other methods you need to implement, which is overriding your abstract methods in the application class. So this is called start method, and it comes with the default parameter primary stage. So this primary stage is where you are going to set your window. So you could scroll down that there's somewhere I probably use primary stage, set the scene, and show. So this is where you connect the window with the window scene and nodes model to make sure that you show this window. Now, there is this scene, how do we have to create it? So where do you create it? This is also under this start method. So I like to call the first scene, which is the first window of your FX application, the main scene, but you could call it any other variable. The main scene, the scene has 3 variables. The first one is the parent node, which this is something, the first element you are going to associate with the scene. And the second and the third will be the size of the window sizes of the GUI. So we have been through this. So the new thing for this class that I give it to you is I implement this called grid pane. So the previous exercise that we did last week, I used flow pane. But if you try to do it, flow pane, which is the easiest one, you could keep adding any elements, the label, the text field, the buttons, but they are going to add one to another to fill out your window. So it doesn't really look very organized. If you resize your window, you are going to see, hey, every element could be lined up horizontally on the same line. What if you want to have a kind of clear sections of menu buttons, of a displayed area, or any other selections? So you want to organize the layout in some sense. Then float pane may not be enough. So you want to, I like to, when I'm implementing any GUI, I like to have my FX API open up. So this come in handy when I need to check, well, how do I even use this particular new class? So the new class here is the grid pane. So you want to look at the JavaFX scene layout. So you notice there are several layout classes that we could use. We used the floor pane before. Now we are using the grid pane. So grid pane, just by the name itself, you know, it's somehow organizing the layout with a grid. So the grid meaning, well, I could have the access to the first row, second row, first column, second column, exactly pointed it out the position of how you are going to implement it. So come back to the code, the grid pane, we created one. And I also use this grid pane to set up every single grid, their gap between grid. So this is something that you could look it up from API. And we created a scene, set it up. The parent nodes is our grid pane. So at this point, we are just telling our GUI, give me a 300 by 300 size of the window and point it to my layout manager, which is our grid pane, the end. And at this point, if you block the rest of the elements out and just show primary stage set scene and primary stage.show, you should see the window. Okay, so this is where kind of we left off last Friday. Now on this layout, I wanted to implement a couple elements. So we implement these elements is depending on how you are going to show up on the GUI. So I put all these GUI elements as the instance variable. So instance variable meaning they are the attributes of this class. So this JavaFX event practice one class, I have couple attributes. I have a label. I have 2 buttons, checkout buttons, reset buttons, and I have a couple checkbox, right? So checkbox meaning I could check multiple of them instead of radio buttons. I could only select one, right? And the other one is just a red list to put all those checkbox items into my checkbox list. That's why I declare an array list, checkbox list, where the elements, all those objects are checkboxed object. Okay. Now the last one is the text area. I call it message area. So at this point, I can somehow imagine, because these attributes are set up, I'm imagining 300 by 300 GUI. There is a label, and there are a couple checkbox, 2 buttons, and a text area. So if you run this Java application, so you should see, hey, yeah, this is somehow what I'm imagining, right? I just call a label to say, hey, check the following items so that I could check them out to my shopping cart. So if I want to buy a burger and a cup of coffee, I check them and I click on checkout. I'm anticipating something would happen, right? For example, I could calculate the price, tell you the shopping list, or tell you to review. And if I click on reset button, I'm thinking to remove all the items from my shopping cart and uncheck all this check box. Right, so this is what we are going to implement today to practice this event handling. So at this point, that we have a couple new classes that we are going to use in JavaFX. by looking at this, the new thing would be the checkbox, the text area, right? So since this is a text area, look at this size here. I cannot input anything. So it also says that, hey, even this is a text area, but I disable the editing function for users. So simply, I'm trying to use the text area as a message display area, right? So by looking at this UI that we want to implement this couple new things. So you could close it out, close this as a application, and let's come back to the code. So once the attributes are declared, we need to initialize it. So we say, well, the initializations in a regular Java application, it comes in your constructor, but driver class should go into the main method. But here, this is Java FX application. So we initialize it, we drive it, begin everything from this start method. So this is where I'm going to initialize my checkbox list. So I initialize it because I'm anticipating, hey, this list object is created, but how are you going to implement it? I'm anticipating whenever I create a new checkbox display, I'm going to put it into this list. Okay, so now if you see the initialization here, menu label is a new label that comes with the text to say what's going to happen with all those potential things, potential elements the user could interact with the user. They could check, they could click on the button. So now the following implementation just to say, hey, what are those checkbox? Checkbox 1, it shows text burger. Checkbox 2 is coffee. Checkbox 3 is cream. Checkbox 4 is donut, right? So obviously you could keep adding it. Now, once I initialize all these checkbox, I add everything into the list, checkbox list. And next thing is initializing the checkout button. I just say checkout. And reset button is where I initialize and call it reset. The new thing here is I wanted to let you know reset will remove all other options. So I want to give it a little cautionary highlight. And the one thing that I changed, which is also the new feature for Java FX, is you could implement it with HTML style of color properties. For example, reset, you check on button class, that set style is where you are going to configure what's the outlook of this style, especially specifically the style referring to the font sizes and the font, the style of the font, and the color of the font or the button color. So how do we set it? Here you see the parameter is actually a strings of the parameters that follow the styles of writing of HTML style, particularly the cascading style sheet, which is what we defined. How do we want to have those color, fonts, all sorts of styles properties on HTML? So for example, without even reading much, I could tell this is a property about background color, right? And you use the column to set it up. This will be hexadecimal digits to show the background color in HTML code. And use the semicolon to separate other properties. So the second property will be the text field. That means the foreground text color. So I'm going to set it as all 6 digits of a F. That means this will be white color. So even without understanding how do we write the CSS, the reset button will still work, right? So you could comment out, put 2 slashes, and try to run the Java application and see, hey, this is still a Java application. I'm just trying to configure my reset button. Don't click it, without double checking it. So I highlighted it in red. But so you could uncheck it, close it out, unblock this reset button style, and to check it out, the code differences is I actually colored it, the button as red. Okay. Now, this is only just the setup, the UI. So once the button is set, the new thing for button is to set it on action. So last week, I tell you the implementation for buttoned actions. We need to create the event handler. Event handler is essentially an interface type. So we need to actually implement this interface into a real method called event handler. So here I like to call it button handler. Whenever a button has actions, I create a new class, which is the inner class, to handle all the events to it. So I call it button handler, implements the event handling interface. So this is how I like to do it, and I recommend you to do so. Even there are several other ways to implement inner classes. This is the way that I like to do, and you will be seeing it in your assignment 6 as well. Okay, so now to create a new class, new inner class, here I'm going to set both of the button into the same event handling because both of them are button, right? So I organize them into a button handler class. So you are going to set actions, which is going to have one argument is the new class's object. So that object will be sitting there and trying to just wait, until there's a user click on that. Then will trigger this inner class to start acting. So that's why it's called set on actions. When there is a new actions, such as clicking, then we do something. So once you have a new button handler object, meaning I need to create a class that could instantiate such object. So I write this inner class down here, right below the public void start method. Private class button handler, which implements the interface type event handler. And event handlers type has an action event. Okay, so within this inner class implementation, because the abstract interface event handler, you need to have an actual implementations on one of the methods, which is called handle. So handle will handle the action events with the default event action event object. So this is where you are waiting whoever click on the button or do anything with the button, then we need to start handling it. How do we handle it, right? So I write down these 2 comments here. For students, you already know how to do it. Please try so. Already implemented it. But if not, just follow me. What we are going to do is, well, we have the layout. That's what you see earlier. But now when I click on checkout, I'm anticipating this button will be handling, checkout button should handle it. When it's click, tell me what items they are selected in the message, printed out in the message area, right? So tell me what checkbox is being selected and printed out in the message area. Second thing is, well, when the reset button is clicked, I'm going to clear out all the selection of the checkboxes, and I'm going to remove what's at the printout. Okay, so let's do first thing first. So here you could imagine, well, when the checkout button is clicked, meaning if the pseudocode, I could imagine it if something is click. So I'm imagining if the button do something, right? But first of all, I need to know is button is even selected, right? So how do I associate here with my event to my button? That's the number one thing. So I'm going to use the action event, which is a listener. It's already created when you are implementing this inner class. So event dot, that's tell me which button is selected. So get the source, it will tell you one event object, but I don't know which one. It could be the button, the checkout button. It could also be the reset button. So event get source. If this one is checkout button, if it's true, that means checkout button is it's the current event, right? It's the source, it's getting selected. If this is the checkout button, it's being pressed, what I need to do is also know how many of those checkbox it's being selected, right? So at this point, I also need to know, well, which checkbox. There are 4 checkboxes. Obviously, I could write a huge conditional selections, conditional logic to know, well, which checkbox is selected. But we added every single one into the list, right? So at this point, we could actually create a for loop that iterate through this checkbox list. Carsten, you have a question? If not, I'm muting you. All right. So, okay, I last then checkbox. So this is also the same similar implementations like your quizzes. I'm still grading it, but just letting you know, you need to be familiar with the syntax of writing an for loop, iterate through a collections of item in array list. So now I have this checkbox for loop, so I could access every single element. And how do I access that? I just use checkbox list dot get I, which you are referring to supposedly the first checkbox, right? So tell me if the first checkbox is it selected? Yes. So if selected, if this is true, that means the first checkbox is selected. So I'm hoping that, well, if it's selected, I'm missing a right parenthesis. If it is selected, let's just print it out first, right? So then we could concatenate whatever the names of it and print it on the message box. So here, let's just get the checkbox list. I need to get the text, huh? Okay. And if it's not selected, we won't do anything. So if it's not click, we won't do anything yet, right? So now, if you have this simple if-else logic implemented, you should at least be able to handle something. Let's look. Run the application. Check on a couple of things. We select burger and cream. Click on checkout. Do you see here? The printouts actually are able to print out what's being selected, right? So coffee and donuts, they were not printed out, right? So yeah, so this is kind of what we want, almost. So let's close it out. So since I want the printout on message area, so what would be a good, well, I guess we don't need a printout. You could just use message area variable, set the text. As the checkout. Let's break a line. So this will look neater. Any questions so far? We are setting the text to our message area. If we got the right boxes selected in the meantime, right? So you could run it. That should do.
Question.
Yes.
What was so I know we created an inner class to kind of handle the events.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need, like, what's stopping you from just making a few like methods instead of a whole inner class? Is there a reason you need to implement that?
Classes implementation, and we will try the one called anonymous inner classes.
To implement that inner class?
Yes. So good question. So let me finish this inner classes implementation, and we will try the one called anonymous inner classes. Right. So why do we need the inner classes? Why a new class? Because we have just the UI, just an attribute. But this attributes, you are setting it on action. Setting it on action, that what does it mean? When there's an action, that means it's at the wrong time, there's an interactions. Then who is going to deal with it? So in JavaFX, this is called event handler class. They will handle all those runtime events. So this is already an interface already created. So what we need to do is to write a class that will implement such interface. That's why we create the inner class. Okay, so organize all those event handling into your inner class so that you could deal with whatever happens on the UI that creates an event. For example, if it's a text field that you type in, you just hit the key enter. Who is going to deal with that, right? Nobody is handling the code, right? So that's why we are writing these in class to handle potentially the event it's being created by is being triggered by the user. Then we need to deal with it. Is it clear?
Yeah, and if you're implementing the event handler interface, does since you're implementing it, you need to have all of the same like methods that it has in the interface.
Right, these handle methods.
Okay, and it always needs to be named.
Write the other potential actions for the events on the reset button. So if, yes?
I also had a question. For the set text, wouldn't that reset the text every time that was called?
Yes.
So it was just the last one?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes. So, okay, maybe that's not append. So what I like to do, see, I also noticed that set text will only set the beginning. So why don't you click on the, so if, now, else if you know, the event is not the checkbox, else if the event get source is actually your reset button, right? Then we will do what? We are going to reset set text to empty, right? So that we clear out all the text. But not just that, we are hoping that we will also, not hoping that we will remove all those checked in this checkbox list, right? So that means we also need to run a for loop here and just uncheck everything. So how do you uncheck everything? You kind of need to access every single one to get every single one and just set it is selected to false. Just set it to not being selected. This makes is selected. So now is bring it out. It's just a boolean. It's not a accessor, right? So it's it makes sense to call the set selected. Thank you. Very good. So now that means, well, not only we are clearing out the message box, the message, the text area. So once we select it, we could check out. Burger and cream are selected. And if you click on reset, it clear out the text here. It also remove the chat. Okay, so this is pretty much this simple exercise is trying to do. So you get a sense of what event handling is doing for you. Now, you may see, you know, I know a lot of you like to find resources by using search engine Google. So I would like to point it out one thing. Did I leave this to you? Let's come back to the line 58, 57, 58. Checkout button, reset button here. I set on actions to trigger the same event to the button handler, because I'm anticipating, I'm grouping these two buttons should be the same thing, right? When I click on checkout, I don't do the reset. When I click on the reset, I don't do the checkout. So that's what I'm associating it to the same button handler, right? But in reality is this reset could happen anytime, right? You could click on reset while, you know, you are still waiting. You're still thinking whether I should buy the coffee or not, right? So that in the sense, this reset button, it's simply trying to handle whatever the interactions the user might be just looking at, playing around this UI. So sometimes here, you don't need to really associate it with the entire class button handler. You could actually create, this is called anonymous inner class implementation. So how do you implement it? Is that's just implement an event handler right into this set on action, right? So what does it mean is I'm actually implement a class. How do I know this is a class? I'm writing it as a curly braces. That means there is a class. So inside here, since this is still a interface, so I still need to override a couple things. So you need to override it. So handle events, and we need to write these classes, handle it. Say for example, remove the message area to set it to. All right. What did I do wrong here now? Inner class right here, because the message is so little. But I do not really recommend this, but you may see several of, you know, maybe even textbook implemented it like this. Can anyone try to? So this will be exactly the same thing of what we do, but because I selected, I don't need to check it out. Okay, this is not listening well. The inner classes implementation, but as you could see, even myself got messed up with a lot of apprentices or the curly braces. So I do not recommend the anonymous inner classes implementation. So that's what I suggest. All the event handling, let's handle it in a separate class. So that way, that's easier to manage. Now let's unify it, and this way it's easier to manage your code, okay? All right, so this will be like our event handling practice, and we will be doing some few more in your next week or Friday. There will be some in-class exercise for you to do to try to control the button when we have a radio button. How do you do that?